I would say, first of all, trust yourself because you know your child better. If your child is struggling and feeling frustrated with what they want to do or what you need them to do, there's no shame in seeking help. I am here. There's a ton of other resources out there for homeschooling kids who are, once you've made this decision and you're having a hard time with it, that's okay. It's okay that you're struggling. Seek help. We're here for you. And then once you do seek help, know that whoever that person is that you're seeking it from is not the end all be all. That person is there to be a part of your team. So don't be afraid to be like, well, this isn't really what I was going for, and this isn't the help that I needed. I'm going to go somewhere else. That's okay. Because again, you know your child the best.
Welcome to the SALT podcast, where we talk about all things simple. Yep, simple anointed living tips. I'm your host, Jenny Peña. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the SALT podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I have a special guest today. I really appreciate Sarah taking the time to come and talk to us about all this wisdom that she has and tips for homeschooling or just for helping our children with their learning and education. So thank you so much, Sarah, for joining me today.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to be here. These podcasts and coming on and talking to other homeschool moms it gets me rejuvenated, but it also inspires me. And I hope it's inspiring to your listeners as well.
Yes, me too. That's the hope, that I get to bring on guests like you, that you have this certain expertise, a specific thing that we need to hear from you. So thank you. But before we jump in, for people that haven't heard about you or know you, can you just give us a little background?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Sarah Collins. My background is actually as an occupational therapist. Even earlier than that, I started as a recreation therapist, and I was working with children with severe and profound special needs. At that point, they lived in a hospital, and I did all of their community integration and going out and just like finding fun things. And at that point, I really realized how much kids learn just from being around in an atmosphere of an enriching atmosphere, basically. And so that was like my first trigger of, hey, learning doesn't have to be seated, at a desk and in a classroom. Then I went back to graduate school to learn to be an occupational therapist. And this was all before we had kids. And I worked then in inpatient rehab and some outpatient clinical work. And then once we had children, I started working in home health care, basically so that I could drop my kids off in the morning. This went all the way through some of their elementary school, drop my kids off in the morning, go see my clients, and then be able to pick my kids up at the end of the school day. I really, I thought this was how I was going to serve the world, was through my career. But interestingly, I was actually in a client's home, and so she was the grandmother, and then she was living with her daughter-in-law and her son. And then her daughter-in-law was homeschooling their kids, and their atmosphere within their home was very different than ours. It was, I was getting home and then I would be quick say, oh, my daughter's 6. Hey, tell me 6 things about your day that I didn't know, and my son who was, in preschool, I'd be like, oh, you're 4. Tell me 4 things about your day. And that was kind of it. And then we would go on into our next, here's field hockey or here's soccer, whatever came next. But it was very rushed. And she said to me one day, she was like, Sarah, I really just feel like I need to tell you about this homeschooling thing. And I was like, yeah, great. You go ahead and do that. But, I'm working full time. I don't really have this opportunity. But lo and behold, within 3 weeks of that conversation, my husband was interviewing then for a job up here in Pennsylvania. And then within 6 weeks, we were finding out about how we were going to move. And it just all, snowballed from there. And so, within that year, we started homeschooling up here, and the state of Pennsylvania. So
wow.
I know it was very crazy, but now looking back on it, I can see how it was just kind of all laid out in some of my early career choices, how they've all played into what I do now.
Wow, what a story. Well,
Right.
God definitely had a plan for you and for your children and your family, how he just
Yes.
placed that person in your life at that exact time. And then
Yes.
everything
Yes. And I do
followed.
wonder, I wonder how many of these, because I tell the story a lot, how many of these different, if she's heard it on different podcasts. And so I don't really honestly know how to get back in touch with her at this point, but I don't wonder if she knows
If
that
you're
she's
listening,
steamrolled.
thank you.
No.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So cool.
so how did that work out? Like starting to homeschool as, when was this? This was recent, I'm assuming?
No. So this was back in when did we move? We moved in 2017. So it was, so back at that point. And my kids were then, my daughter was, she was we were like finishing up her third grade year. So we didn't start until it was actually almost May of that year. So it was basically writing down the school year of her third grade year, my middle son's kindergarten year. And then my youngest at that point was 1. So, his, whatever, his toddler.
Yeah.
So we haven't looked back since that point. We met a fantastic group of people here in Pennsylvania. And honestly, I was really worried because we were moving somewhere that I didn't know anybody. And, but for us, then we kind of fell into this group of, I sought out co-ops and I sought out, different organizations for my kids to like extracurricular things for my kids to be involved with that had a lot of homeschool families also involved. And so Pennsylvania, there's a pretty large group of homeschooling families. And since then it's just become even bigger and closer knit. And it's been really, really good. But for the first few years, so 2017 to 2019, I was solely focusing on my own children, and learning and reading and gleaning. Our homeschool, your question, how did that go? It was okay. I started very similarly to a lot of other people where you think, okay, well, I saw what was working for her at her house. And so I'm going to do that at my house. And it doesn't work that well, because everybody's kids are different and your environment is different. And, your schedule during the day is different. And so that's the beauty of homeschooling, is that every single homeschool can look and should look different based on the needs of our specific kids.
Very true. And I feel like it does take a little bit, a year, 2 years, especially when we have more than one child, and then trying to manage everything and getting used to being back home and finding our own rhythm as women and wives, and now being at home and having other chores plus homeschooling. And so it does take a little bit. It does feel rocky. And then, I'm sure you started seeing like how you wanted to do it, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. And what my envision at the very beginning versus what it turned into, and it continues to morph, every year my kids obviously get older. Now my daughter is going into the 8th grade, and that's a whole different situation when everybody was little, and my youngest, who, like I said, was 1 at that point, he's getting ready to start with us. Like this year will be his first year where he's really involved in having to do his own math and his own, reading. And so that's all going to look very different this year than it did before. So every year, it's difficult and beautiful all at the same time. And thankfully,
because I know what you mean.
Yes. I mean, thankfully there's grace and new beginnings every single day, because we get that opportunity to, even if the day before was like, well, that's a whole lot of terribleness, then the next day, you start over in the new morning, and we get to do that together as a family, which is really good.
So I want to ask you about this whole occupational therapy thing, because I started following you on Instagram for a few years. I don't know how long you've been doing this, but it feels like I've been following you for a while, because you started sharing like a lot of information and tying that to homeschoolers, right?
Yes, yes, yes. So I started this account, which is Homeschool OT. I started this account in the beginning. Oh, I think it was like April of 2019. And basically, what had happened was I was keeping up with my occupational therapy license, and I went to a handwriting without tears workshop. And the teacher there, she was like, Sarah, I don't think you know how many homeschool families come to these, seminars, and they just really would benefit from having an occupational therapist who understands their world, the homeschooling world, as well as the OT world. And I was like, yeah,
Oh,
great.
wow.
That's fantastic. But I don't really know how to make that happen. And I'm really focused on my own kids. That was,
Yeah.
my first thing. A few days later, actually, it was all within the same week. A good friend of mine whose daughter has cerebral palsy, she called me and she was like, Sarah, I just have some questions for you. I really need to talk. I said, great, absolutely. Because I'm very passionate about OT. I love working with families, and we can go into a little bit more of what OT is. But
Yeah.
so I was like, yeah, sure, let's talk about that. And we did. And at the end of that conversation, she was like, Sarah, you should really start a business, because this really, there's so many families that could benefit from this. And I was like, oh my goodness.
So
Okay,
true.
great. And then later on in that exact same week, I was doing my Bible study, my morning, quiet time. And I opened up the Bible app on my phone, and the first thing that popped up was a Bible study for entrepreneurs. And at that point, I was kind of like, okay, like, here we go, So it took a long time. I mean, that was in April, and it took until October to kind of go through like the business wise and all the legal parts and all of that of what exactly will that look like, and how does that fit in with my family and all of that. But basically what I do, occupational therapy, is the word occupation itself goes back. It's actually really interesting now that I'm putting it all together. Goes back to Charlotte Mason times when she was publishing all of her books, and she was around the exact same time as the founders of occupational therapy. And so occupation is defined itself as anything and everything that a person needs and wants to do in a day. So it can be anything from, I making my bed, to eating breakfast, to sitting still to complete math work. It is anything that a person needs and wants to do. And then what an OT does is we look at that. We say, okay, so here's the occupation. And let's just take, give me an example. What's something that your son or your daughter needs and wants to do right now? And we'll go from there.
Okay. So let's see. I guess my daughter, she's calling herself an author. So
I love it.
So I'm trying to find, I found a quote that said, the best authors or something like that are also really good readers. So I told her that, and she told her brother, my son, that the reason that she needs to read a lot is because she needs to be a good reader to be a good author. So I'm like, okay, I guess that stuck to her.
Yes, I love that.
So how would you break that down?
Yeah. So even if we just think about reading, and this actually is a very passionate subject for me too, because my son really struggled with reading. So let's think about just reading within itself. So to be able to read, you have to be able to, your eyes have to be able to scan from left to right to go across a page. Perceptually, you have to be able to take each letter and understand what that means. Or like that an A is different than an E, and that an A is still an A in a different font. You have to be able to visually, and your brain has to be able to interpret all of those different things. You have to be able to, most of the time at least, sit. I mean, my kids are sometimes reading on their, they're upside down or whatever, but you have to be able to regulate your body enough that you are attending to the whole words on the sentence on the page. You have to be able to turn a page in a book. So that requires motor skills. There's so many little teeny things that you have to be able to do. So what an occupational therapist does is we break that down and we say, okay, so what are the skills within the person So we just said a few. I mean, this is obviously not all inclusive, but we just said a few, the motor skills, the sensory processing to be able to sit still, the focus. So what could we do to help if there's anything wrong or anything holding a kiddo back from achieving those skills? And then we look at the specific environment. So like maybe your kiddo has a really hard time with that focus in the morning, but might be better off in the afternoon, or flip flop. It might be because of sensory processing. Like, for example, my own son, he needs a lot of deep, heavy work to really know where his body is before he can attend to specific tasks, or to be able to sit down to do any type of comprehension where he has to be focused and attending. So for him, if I started off our day with that, he would be a disaster. But yet, if I start off after he has had his time in the morning where he literally goes outside and climbs trees or mows the lawn or does whatever physical heavy work that he needs to do, then it's a whole different ballgame. So I look at, the time of day, the environment, and then the occupation itself. So within reading, is it, do we need to look at specific fonts in books? Do we need to look at where the book would be held? Or, should it be up on a stand or flat on a table, or other occupation that has to go, like adaptations to the occupation of that? Do we need different lighting? All of these different ways that we can adapt the occupation itself. So that's what I do. And that's how I work with families and trying to help to figure out what their kiddo needs and help to be successful.
Wow. That sounds so amazing. Like, that's like so thoughtful. Like, there's so much like awareness involved, because as you say those things, like I think about my own son, who now I'm like thinking, okay, maybe we shouldn't do those things in the morning, because it's true, like he gets so fidgety and he needs to hold the book up, and I'm like, just leave it still, please, because he's like flopping the pages all over, and I'm like, just leave it on the table, stop picking it up. But he wants to pick it up and like move it all around and shake it. I'm like, how are you able to read like this?
How can you even focus on that? But you're right. It very well could be that, the more feedback that we get through our joints, the more we know where our body is in space. And so, especially with kids who are learning their own bodies, but then they grow and they don't know their bodies again. And so they need all this feedback through their joints. That's why they're wiggling and they're squirming and they're getting up, and it's all because it's feedback that they need. And as parents, we want to be like, sit down, because they're bothering us,
Yeah. So
you're stressing me out. You're moving all over the place.
Exactly. So where would we start? Like, where would be a good place to start with our children? I guess maybe picking one place to help them with, and then observing them doing that one thing. Like, where would you even start?
So what I would start with is, I love to do self-reflection with my kids and just say, like, asking them, what is it that you want to do? And what is it that you need to do? What is easy for you in a day? What is hard for you in a day? And go through that. Some things, we are more in tune to than they are. Like, he might think, if you asked him, how's reading going? He might be like, oh, it's totally fine. Meanwhile, you're like, yeah, but you're like squirming all over the place and your book is on your head and then you're jumping around and how is that going well? But in his mind it is. But still, pairing those two things together is important. What he thinks and what you think is important. And then I try to look at, okay, so if this is hard for you, why? And a lot of times that requires some help, that requires me or another occupational therapist, or seeking out help from other professionals that Sometimes it's that, and I say this 100% of the time, you are the expert in your kid. So when families come to me and they're like, well, this is the issue. This is where he's having a hard time. Obviously your child more than I know your child, but I know a lot of the skills to break down the activity that you wouldn't necessarily think of. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It makes sense because like how you just broke down basically my daughter and her reading. Like I wouldn't think of all of those different things, like flipping the page and focusing, like
Yeah.
the changing fonts and things like that. I
Yeah.
wouldn't really, think about that. And that's just a small example because I didn't give you like information on maybe something what she's struggling with that I would like, to help her with or whatever the case may be. But okay, so like starting with self-reflection with our kiddos, what's another thing that like in general parents can look into to you said that you actually offer like coaching or like one-on-one calls?
I do. I do. I work specifically with families now, and this all came from, those conversations that I told you about before, from those three very direct, I think a direct calling. And so, yes, what I do, my website is homeschoolot.com. And what I do is work with families. They fill out a very simple form, kind of like, what are your goals and what are you trying to get to with your children? And then what I do is I don't do direct occupational therapy, like where I would be working with the kids on building these skills. But what I do is work with parents on how do you build it into your day. So we do like a parent interview at the beginning. I do a lot of questionnaires on sensory processing and to kind of find out what is holding this child back from doing the things that he needs or wants to do, he or she needs or wants to do. And then I do all of parent education where we would go through kind of exactly very similar to what we did. I mean, granted, I didn't know anything about your daughter. I was just kind of saying a lot of the skills that you would need for that, but we break those skills down and we look at what can you do during the day to help your child. How can you adjust your environment, or how can you adjust the activity or occupation within your home? And sometimes it is that, yes, you do need to go to occupational therapy and work with an OT, in which case I am working with occupational therapists to teach them about homeschooling. I have a course, and from there, once OTs go through it, then they're on my, preferred provider list. The main reason for that was that I was hearing from families that, we went into OT, but they told me that I needed to go into the public school system to get services. And I was told that, asked all these questions of, how do you socialize your kid? And is this really the best environment for them? And that's not okay. That's just not okay, because any professional that is working with you or with a family or anywhere should be a part of your team and respect that you are the expert in your child and you are making the decisions and they're there to help you. So that's my shtick. And I'll keep saying it over and over and over, because I think every parent, especially parents who are dealing with kids who are struggling and what they want to do, right? Then we as parents are like, oh, am I making the right decision? And we question ourselves. And don't question yourself, trust yourself and seek help. That's people here people that are on your team should be working with you and for you.
Exactly. So if you're going to hire somebody and go through, the trouble of asking for help and seeking help for your children, they should, like you said, they should be on your team. So that's, so your training, you have a training or like a coaching for OTs to get to know what homeschooling is. What feedback have you gotten from them about that? From the OT?
Really good, actually. It's I have worked with a number of occupational therapists who are working in nature-based programs, and nature-based programs cater so well to homeschoolers, especially homeschoolers who are wild and free, or homeschoolers who are following Charlotte Mason or Waldorf. Everybody's like, get us outside. And so especially those therapists, it's been really good. What the course is it goes through, first, it's like the stigma of homeschooling and what basis is there for that. I mean, there are some truth. And hey, there's a lot of homeschooling families that drive minivans, right? That's okay. Like, you can call me a minivan mom all day long. I don't care. But if you're saying that our kids are going to be all weird and that they aren't getting the best education, like that's a whole different stigma. And, we're going to talk about that. The second part is the history of homeschooling and research on occupational therapy and homeschooling, but also some just on NERI.com. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's a National Home Education Research Institute. And there's peer-reviewed articles on that site that go through even things from educating, kids with autism and looking a lot at social skills and kids who are homeschooled. And those articles are peer-reviewed within a journal, just the same as, an article of occupational therapy would be peer-reviewed and published in a journal. So I go through a lot of that different research. And then the third is types of homeschooling and how that would impact occupational therapy. Kids who are unschooled versus classically educated versus Charlotte Mason versus Waldorf, Montessori, there's so many different ways that people are educated that it can impact what an occupational therapist would be doing. Like if in the Waldorf philosophy, you don't start writing typically until like you're 6 or 7.
Yeah.
But
7.
in the public school system, right, you're writing before that. And so a lot of OTs are working on handwriting. Well, you wouldn't be doing that if you're working with someone who's educated in Waldorf. So, it really just kind of goes along with how we educate impact the goals of occupational therapy.
Wow, that is amazing. And you basically had to pick all of that up in your own experience and you transformed it into like, well, if you want to be an OT and have homeschool parents clients, then they can skip that whole process that you had to do years of your own, groundwork and skip all that. And here you go. Here's everything that I learned. And basically they can serve the community right away.
Yes, exactly. And the main reason I did it was for homeschool families, because I want people to feel safe getting help. And I want people to know when they're going in to get into an occupational therapist that this person isn't going to question their decisions and is going to know how to best treat their child. So just that respect and autonomy, I think, is so important, but it also helps my fellow OTs. I mean, like I said, I'm passionate really about OT and about homeschooling and helping my fellow OTs to best serve this population is really important. And then for me to be able to provide them, clients, because I know that they are educated in what homeschooling is and how to best serve us, then I'm thrilled to send them, direct clients. I have a person in Colorado who needs to come and, see you. So it's great to be able to pair that up together.
Wow, that is such a great work that you're doing. And you also mentioned that you are also doing like public speaking, or you're teaming up with other speakers.
Yes, I am. I've done a couple of like our local conventions. I just spoke at the CHAP convention here and then some digital ones. But the thing I'm most excited about, and I do hope that some people hear this on here. So Kim Barthel, she is a world-renowned speaker actually on trauma, on the science behind trauma. And she's done so much research on the impacts of trauma on our brain. And so I'm teaming up with her, and we're going to do a speech in August, or not a speech, an interview in August. It's on August 11th, where I'm going to interview her all on the science and, like I said, of trauma and what it does to our bodies. And then we're going to apply it to the homeschool world. So for families who have either come into homeschooling because of a traumatic situation within another school, or families who are at home and then dealing with trauma, or, have had a death in the family, or have had abuse, or trauma is really, it's wide as it's as wide as can be. So, but for us to know how to help our children within the homeschool, I think is really so valuable. And so
Oh, yeah.
I'm just so excited to team up with her and to bring that to the homeschool community. So that's going to be in August 11th.
Okay, I'm gonna be looking for that. So I had a few other questions though, because you mentioned a few
Yeah.
things about occupational therapy, like occupation, and
Mm-hmm.
also with like different homeschool philosophies or how people decide to homeschool. Everybody does it different, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Unschoolers, like we lean more towards unschooling, but we
Mm-hmm.
also use a few different like curriculums. But I'm so
Mm-hmm.
curious about, I don't even know how to ask because like it's so new to me. Like occupation can is anything that you need to do, right? But then you tie
Yes.
in like chores, like certain chores that can help achieve reading. Like, can you explain that like a little bit more?
Yeah.
Hey, it's me, just taking a quick sec to let you know about the Pink Premium Access. Get the link for access in the show notes or heavenlytreasure.net, where you can choose monthly or yearly access options. You will get all the uncut gems hidden from the SALT podcast, plus exclusive episodes, promos from guests, Ask Me Anything episodes, and private group Zoom calls for access members only. Sorry to hide these next gems from you. See you in the Pink Premium, and thanks for helping me keep the show alive and running. Yeah, I'm glad that you said that because I feel like some people look at, what we do, our accounts or,
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurs, and they think we do it all. And no,
Yeah.
it's not. No,
Yeah.
my husband cooks way more often than I do. I love
Yep.
breakfast. I definitely need to cook like a full breakfast. I can't just have a bowl of cereal. So I love breakfast and
Mm-hmm.
I'll do that every day. I don't mind. But in the evening, okay, no. I'm done
No,
with the
I am done.
kitchen.
I am done. And to be honest with you, I don't actually cook any meals anymore. My daughter loves cooking. She actually did her own well, loves baking and cooking, but she did her own bakery one summer when she was younger, and I can trust her in the kitchen beautifully. All
Oh,
my kids, like, they just kind of assemble their breakfast, even my 5-year-old, while we're doing our morning time. So I'm in there, but they're doing their own food. And then lunch, sometimes I'll like make it or assemble it or, whatever. But most of the time, again, we're all together and I'm reading and they're making their own food. I hate it. It's not my thing. I want to make sure you're fed, but I don't really want to be a part of it. So in
it's
our
also,
house, that's kind of what has worked.
well, I can't wait for that because my children always want to be in the kitchen making food, and they do little things in the morning like oatmeal or, things that
Yeah.
they can do. Like I still do the hot water for them because I'm scared they'll burn themselves. But like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait for them to like be able to be full blown like, Mommy, we made your breakfast. Like, yes.
Yes.
But yeah, it's
Yeah,
true.
my
We don't do it
son,
all.
right? My son last year, so he's 10 now. Last year he was 9. And at the beginning of COVID, we had to bring in my husband's grandparents. They were in assisted living that COVID just kind of went rampant. And so we brought them here to live with us, and they were 90. And we have chickens,
Whoa.
and my son took it upon himself every morning. It was his time with Pappy, and he would make him eggs every morning, and they would just sit there right next to it. They never talked, but they would just sit there. And it was just so beautiful. And they could bond and do that over food, this 90-year-old man and this 9-year-old boy. And that was their thing. So yeah,
Oh,
it
that's
is,
amazing.
it's
I
not my
just
jam, but I'm
like
so glad that they do.
I just visualized your life. Like, would that have happened when if you would have chosen to just put them back into public school when you moved?
Right.
Like,
It
would
is.
that moment have happened?
No,
Wow.
no, definitely not. Well, I mean, maybe it would have, because I think at that point everybody was coming home because of COVID. So I guess everybody was in their homes. But at the same time, I think his independence within the kitchen and his independence, even like his level of comfort with people of all ages, that really happened because of homeschooling. He wasn't around only kids his own age. I have seen that so many times. My older daughter will play with little kids, and my little guy who's 5 has no problems walking up to teenagers and, talking to them. And because that's what he's used to. He's used to everybody being together. And as far as being around adults, they don't just have one teacher or, even 6 teachers throughout a middle school day. We go in, we do 2 different co-ops, and it's different people's parents, and they are very comfortable talking to different adults as well. So I don't know. I think there are definite skills that they built because of homeschooling that probably made that moment happen.
Oh, that's so special. And it just makes me so happy, like just so happy for you. And like, even just thinking of my own children too, and experiences that I've seen them also, like they're very shy, but they will befriend children super fast and just take off. Or like, it's true, if we visit other homeschool parents or other families, they'll be fine, with they'll be comfortable with asking for things. And that's amazing that you said that, because I hadn't really thought about it like that too, like different ages and just the freedoms, I guess, that they've been able to have as far as like different exposures, and they're not just sitting inside of a classroom all day long.
Right.
My daughter actually, I'll just say this, a quick story. My daughter actually, when we moved to China, when we were in Beijing for the few months that we were there before everything started happening over there, my husband worked at a Montessori school, so they got free tuition at that school. So I let them try, why not? She ended up staying for 3 months. My son lasted a day because he said it felt like prison. So he came back home. Buddy. That was fine with me. I mean, I think he was like maybe almost 4 at the time. But then she stayed for a few months, but then the whole schedule started weighing on her. Just the whole waking up early, getting ready, not having your own, because you're not allowed to bring nuts. And she's a big peanut butter eater. Like that's like the top of her food chain, like peanut butter. She can't have that at all. Whoa. So it was like so many things that I think they realized, or she especially realized, I want to be homeschooling. So she made the decision, because I didn't want to, and I told her, I'm not going to tell you yes or no, you decide. And just like for a few weeks, she just kept asking me in the morning, every so often, every few days, can I stay home? I'm like, sure. And then if she said she wanted to go to school, I'm like, okay, get ready.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. But then it was like, okay, your teachers want to make sure that you're not missing out. So I think you have to decide. And, Daddy kept asking, because he was going to work anyway. And then I had to tell him at one point, stop asking her because you're confusing her. But that was pretty much the only time I stepped in. Like, please stop asking her. We have our day planned.
Yes.
So, but that was it.
Think of like that autonomy that she got from there, and the making the decision of self-advocacy. And I mean, just even that within itself, like you were really intentionally teaching her this. You get to look at these skills and the environment and decide whether it's going to match for you. I mean, she's going to have to do that when she's getting a job, and she has to do that when she's choosing her church. Those skills that we're teaching our kids just by doing life with them has direct transfers into whatever they're going to do as they get older.
Oof. Yeah. Definitely. It's definitely. All right.
So beautiful.
That was my story, the little short version of it. But before we close off, I just want to ask you if you have one message that you can tell homeschool moms, or any moms who maybe don't know about occupational therapy, or don't know like where to even begin with their children's needs. Like, what encouragement or what words would you have for them?
I would say, first of all, trust yourself because you know your child better. If your child is struggling and feeling frustrated with what they want to do or what you need them to do, there is no shame in seeking help. I am here. There's a ton of other resources out there for homeschooling kids who are, once you've made this decision and you're having a hard time with it, that's okay. It's okay that you're struggling. Seek help. We're here for you. And then once you do seek help, know that whoever that person is that you're seeking it from is not the end all be all. That person is there to be a part of your team. So don't be afraid to be like, well, this isn't really what I was going for, and this isn't the help that I needed. I'm going to go somewhere else. That's okay. Because again, you know your child the best, and maybe I have, but I doubt it, that I have met a parent who doesn't care. I really have not met a parent that doesn't care or is not their kid's best advocate. So just keep working at it and keep working with your child, and just know that you are on the right route, and don't be afraid.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I love that you said that. And my prayer is that anybody listening, that you have learned something from Sarah today. It's nighttime for me here. And that you can glean on her. Please follow her accounts. Oh yes, Sarah, please tell us what your website and your social media accounts are.
So I have Homeschool OT, which is on Instagram. I have, I have Homeschool OT, which is a website, www.homeschoolot.com. And then my Facebook group is Homeschool Therapy Ideas. So you can find me at any of those 3 places, or you can always email me. I'm Sarah at homeschoolot.com. So hopefully pretty easy to find me.
Yes, and we're going to have all that information in the show notes, and you can just click the link and find Sarah super easily. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
You are very welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening in. Be sure to hit subscribe and visit heavenlytreasure.net for more. See you on IG at Heavenly Treasure Living. Till next time, blessings, and remember to be the salt of the earth.